We're the catalyst, right? Like we have to be the catalyst.
Yeah. Right smack dab in the middle. It's like if you're looking at like if you're looking at time like it's a ticker tape, and this is the cataclysmic event, we're like here. We're actually much closer depending on what your scale is there. You know what I mean? It's terrifying, honestly. Our own potential scares me more than, well, it doesn't scare me more than space.
Yes.
It doesn't, but it's close. It's close.
Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe. And we're the Ghouls next door. Talk about spooky stuff.
Yeah.
Like the future.
And space.
Like space travel, which is terrifying for me. As we've covered. I know that our future is in the stars. Thank you, Octavia. But maybe like future when I'm not here. I'll hold it down here.
Yeah, it's cool. We're going to be in the chaos part of the Star Trek saga before they get to space. We're in like the bad part where all the nuclear war happens. And then hundreds of years from now, it gets cool where they're all in space, everything's peaceful.
Yeah. We're at the point where
we're at the bad part.
Desperate enough to use our tools of mass destruction, rewire them so we could go to space. And then aliens are like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah,
let's help you out here. But for those listening, we are the Ghouls Next Door, an award-winning media literacy show from a horror lens where we explore the real-life, historical, and scientific, societal influences behind our cinematic fears. And today we're talking about Star Trek, which is just a show that has a history, right? It has been around for like, I feel like forever. It has influenced so much of media, especially science fiction media. And it also follows some similar hopeful themes that we find in like Octavia Butler's work and some of the other things where it's like, there's the usual suspects that are trying us, right? But at the core, it's kind of like, we don't have scarcity anymore. We've evolved. We can have whatever we want.
Capitalism and, as you said, scarcity. We can just clone all the food. So now we have all the food we want and no one has to be starving. And now there's all these different worlds. We unite all together because aliens, which is a fun feature.
And free healthcare. Don't forget. It is, it's a lovely show, which is funny to talk about on the Ghouls because there are many like horrifying episodes because that just kind of comes hand in hand with just being in space, right? Like dealing with like aliens who have different abilities, but also thinking of a world where we have removed some of those usual motivators for violence. And now it's like, who's left to still have those motivators? Like, what does it look like in this world? Because there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be challenges. And so I can't speak for Kat, but I myself have not watched a lot of Star Trek. I did watch a little bit of The Next Generation. It was one of my sleep shows where it was like a calming show to put on. And I grew up in a house with a Trekkie, but never indulged in it. It wasn't for me, just because it wasn't a very positive environment that I was in that like allowed that for me. I was like, that's cool. But then when I try to talk actual space, this person would get really mad. And so I was like, that show must not be that. And I'm completely wrong. And now like I need to watch everything there ever was.
Yeah. Now I watched all of whatever the first one was. I watched all of that. Because it was on Netflix and I was like, I'm gonna watch the whole thing. And I definitely was very into sci-fi as a kid, as first favorite movie was Terminator 2 and what have you. So like any movie that was like robot, space, future, I wanted to watch it. So I definitely watched it, and it's like whatever the first one was. And then I definitely saw The Next Generation. And I don't know if other than like to prepare for this episode, if I had seen a lot of like the other ones. I've seen like clips from them and like some imagery from it, but I like didn't get a deep dive until we were able to come together for this.
Yeah, which is because we're haven't been as well versed in the lore and just history and just impact of Star Trek and all the different iterations of it. We, especially for this series, wanted to invite some guests in, and we have the perfect guests for it. When we were like thinking of science fiction as a series, I was like, well, 100% we're going to do this because I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to get excited and just kind of geek out about it. And so for this show, we're going to be inviting back Kennedy, who joined us for way back in our episodes about space exploration. You were part of our Black Tribbles series, talking about space exploration all back then. So thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me. Hello, Ghouls.
Spooky.
I can't help it every time.
Hi, Kennedy.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invite. I always love an opportunity to talk about Trek, and I love what you all are doing. So let's get to it.
Absolutely. So as I was saying, so there's a good reason why we invited Kennedy to come and talk about Trek, because one, it's one of her favorite things, but she's also a member of the WomenAtWarp podcast, which is committed to examining Star Trek from a feminist perspective, exploring intersectionality, diversity, and infinite combinations with a multitude of hosts. And she is a part of your Away team, which has Starfleet's finest as they review the Trek universe through the lens of a Black perspective. Super important. And you'll find that Kennedy is a true Trekspert, as we found. Who's very passionate about Star Trek and also many, many nerdy things. And so there was no better person to kind of guide us through the stars and, really talk through what is amazing about Star Trek.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited, particularly because let me turn my game down here. It's a rough time for the fandom if you consider yourself a progressive individual, someone who, focuses on intersectionality and making sure that marginalized communities are represented appropriately, just in general, but also through the lens of something as impactful as Star Trek, as you said. Like, it's been around since 1966, so 50 plus years.
Yeah.
I think the last counted at over 800 hours of programming when you include the movies. So it's just really a fun medium to look at, not only interesting ways of telling stories about personal development and interpersonal, I don't want to say issues because it has a negative connotation, but for lack of a better term, issues, because, it's things we can only perceive things from the basis of our own experiences and using that as reference points. So Star Trek on a whole is how the human race, with all of our nonsense with us, manages to not only survive our own disastrous impulses, but also, developing technology that enables us to reach the stars, and now having to interact with people from different planets who have different, biological makeup, different literal atomical molecular differences from you. And yet you still have to work with this person. You have to find a way to meet common ground and have a conversation. One of the things I love that you mentioned earlier is how humanity has the opportunity to experience life, exist post scarcity, post capitalism, post nationalism, all of that stuff. So the core thing that I think people gravitate towards Star Trek for is it always has an element of hope, right? They never shy away from past issues. They don't really get into it necessarily all the time, but they definitely use mistakes, use grievances, use conflicts to inform their decisions on how not only we deal with ourselves, but also other people as well. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't like there was a switch that someone turned on and all of a sudden everybody was like, all right, cool. Let's use this replicator thing and only make food and shelter. This will be great. No one's going to want to make a gun. There was, you mentioned kind of first contact when we first meet another species in this Roddenberry universe. But, as we find out through other series and, kind of not retconning, but you know, a little in-universe nonfiction, let's say, that, you know, humanity destroyed itself. There was a third world war because corporations had taken over national government responsibilities and people were dying en masse and they were diseased and uneducated and unhoused, and only a few small percentage had access to all of those things. And then we blew ourselves up. I think a third of the population survived the Third World War. And I think I would hate to think that humanity needs to get to that point where we must
before we can
not only lose everything, but like we're the source of that loss. We're the cause of that loss. Like, I don't want it to come to that, right? But that's how it happened. And it's interesting because you two mentioned the original series and Next Generation, right? Well, the next series after that, Deep Space Nine, does a really good job of tackling complicated perspectives when it comes to, again, those interpersonal issues, humanity's progression or lack thereof in some cases, all that stuff. And they did a great episode called Past Tense that, on a quick side note, they get trapped in some timey-wimey nonsense and they go back in time right before the first pivotal event that sparks the revolution, right? Or at least the Third World War. It's kind of like the way George Floyd's murder was used as a catalyst to call attention to all of these intricate and nuanced issues that marginalized folks, particularly in the Black intersections, deal with on a regular basis. Except in that situation, it was much, much worse. Yeah. There were literal like concentration camps. They called them sanctuary cities. And, you know, no one had any money. People were just trying to work. Not everybody they were criminalizing poverty, essentially. And then something happens. I don't want to give too much away in case, you know, someone wants to watch. And it sparks, you know, the call for change and the call for action when it came to, you know, the liberation of oppressed people. Well, what's scary about that, as much hope as I have that we would, you know, get to this point where Starfleet can be a thing and we can meet the Vulcans or Bike and Chill, you know, that happened in Star Trek lore, September 1st, 2024.
Oh, that's tomorrow.
So the fact it's like, oh no, that's tomorrow. So and that episode aired, I don't know, what was that, 96, 97, something like that. They just threw a date out there that they figured would be far enough in advance that people would use it as a cautionary tale and make better choices. But that didn't happen because, as you said, Kat, that's tomorrow. So it's one of those things where the progression of humanity only reached the point where the Vulcans would even consider dealing with them, because we had experienced enough loss, not only personally, but also as a species. We had enough loss that the few that were left realized that we need to do better. So this way they were able to build cool things so that they could go into the future, and not to the future, they could go into space and the Vulcans could be like, yo, what's up? Do you know what's up, little half monkeys? Do you know what you're playing with here? What's that you got there? Is that a homemade warp drive?
And they're like,
come here, let me talk to you for a second. It's like finding some people on like a remote desert island that have email capabilities with like sticks and twigs, and be like, whoa,
how do you do that?
What you doing there? How did this happen? Tell me everything. Show your work type situation. So I would hope for us that we don't have to get to the point where the bell rides happen, and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, that's a scary thought in and of itself, that it's tomorrow.
And that we're in the middle space. Like we are in the. We're the ones who have to like go before they can get to the better space. And I hope that that's not
We're the catalyst, right? Like we have to be the catalyst.
Yeah. Right smack dab in the middle. It's like if you're looking at like if you're looking at time like it's a ticker tape, and this is the cataclysmic event, we're like here. We're actually much closer depending on what your scale is there. You know what I mean? It's terrifying, honestly. Our own potential scares me more than, well, it doesn't scare me more than space.
Yes.
It doesn't, but it's close. It's close.
Yeah.
It's close
and
for sure.
I think it's, it's so easy when we are looking at the future, because so often like futuristic media has this really like doom and gloom message to it. And that was something I didn't really want to lean into when we were covering science fiction, because something we try to do is incorporate that hope, right? Ways to help, ways to kind of look at it in this new way, the potential for us to persevere through it. And that's what, we really appreciated about like Octavia Butler's work, is that it was acknowledging that, yes, there's all these terrible things that are going to happen. There is a results, right? There is an impact that we and like the generations before us are going to have on our environment and on the people around us. But that doesn't mean we have to like give up, right? Like there is this potential for us to pick ourselves up and reimagine a future, and it can be tomorrow. Like I was Octavia Butler. That was like 2020. Like she was envisioning the Donald Trumpian president, thinking of like Blade Runner was like yesterday. Like all those things, they were like 2020 sounds so science fiction and futuristic, and it's like, no, it's happening right now. But it is interesting to look at what like the world that we're in right now, and that it's not quite the science fiction level, but there are a lot of things that we can point to be like, oh, I see, like AI, right? Like, oh, look at that, 3D printers. There's so many ways that like Trek has also predicted the future in different ways, and in specific technology, and just being really like understanding how we would solve problems. But something I just really appreciate about Roddenberry was having this hopeful like aspect in a time that also felt really bleak and dark for him. Like just like maybe it's not the pivotal event that Deep Space Nine was sharing with us, but it definitely felt like it was going to lead to that. Like it made sense that would be a natural progression, and that we would have a summer like 2020 that would then lead to the summers to come that will have, like, we're just going to keep going because we haven't fixed it yet. Like we're still in the midst of that. We're still combating those issues. And as, where, the other generations before us are kind of, aging out, and we got new ones coming in. There's just this new narrative and new approach to issues that are coming out that I think would be something that would influence, creating some like a warp drive out of a nuclear weapon and getting the attention of an alien species, which is like, there's nothing more humbling than,
I'm telling you, like that's growing up on this, because I was raised on it, right? My mom was a huge Trek fan, so I've been around it forever. Mm-hmm. And the most alarming thing about Trek now is, before it was just a vacuum of space, right? And when there were hull breaches and the guy gets sucked out, that sucks, right? Literally and also metaphorically. I see what they did there. Hey. But the truly horrifying part about Star Trek at this point is how predictive it became, even after Gene Roddenberry had passed and other people had taken creative control over it. And how that was in the 90s, right? How it had kind of predicted this proposed future that we're now kind of walking inadvertently into. What's scary about Trek nowadays is how polarizing the more modern stuff has become. Stuff that was produced really from Star Trek Discovery onward has really dug deep into the interpersonal issues and how people react after being through a traumatic event in space, right? Not just your pew pew, but also, the person that you have to pew pew is possessed by a omnipotent nanobot species that just wants to obliterate all life, and now you got to shoot your crewman in the face. Like and not just like, oh, that would happen last week, I'm moving on because I'm a officer and that's what officers do. Like, no, people stay kind of jacked up about these things that they encounter on these shows. And while I and other progressive minded people really appreciate seeing that, because we all wonder, like, how do these people even take lunch? Like, what did you just when's the end of your shift? Do they not take shifts? Like, I have human rights concerns.
Who gets to sleep?
Who's the union lead here? Who do I talk to? They don't shy away from any of that in the newer series. And we really dive deep into not only what would be a challenging situation just on a planet, but a challenging situation in space, in a chain of command, and there's a crisis happening as well, whether that's an environmental crisis or a conflict with another group. Like, it's always something, and even if it isn't something, you can still, something can blow up and you're going. Like, that whole rupture thing is not, even though they've established that the ships and the technology are pretty much safe, I guess, for lack of a better term, it's still a possibility, as with all spacefaring science fiction. So nowadays it's alarming to see how people are reacting to, some of us are like, hell yeah, go to therapy, right? And then some of people are like, I don't want to see this is wishy-washy, no one cares about your feelings. Why is there so many queer people in Star Trek now? And it's like,
it's the future, dude.
It's the future. You're in a retro ass relationship. Pardon my French. Like, you are vintage, my dude. This is an old timey-wimey retro hetero situation that you're trying to defend. Like, breathe. It'll be okay. Nothing will happen to you if someone else gets more screen time than these white dude in the back.
They got it. They had it.
So what's alarming nowadays versus what was alarming back then when all these things were being predicted is how congruent they are. And when you think about that conceptually, about how the show has impacted folks and how culture and society react to it, or impacted as well, influence rather, I should say. Like, then there's the in-story stuff too, which it can be terrifying. You can get fun pieces where they're in like period dresses, or there's shenanigans afoot, and it's more of a comedic lean than anything else. But I think Trek is really underrated for its horror because it's got so many different types.
Yeah. Even the episodes you told us to watch were very much like body horror, evolution horror, plague. Like, there was a lot of murder mystery. Like, there was a lot going on.
And I'm in space.
Yeah. What? You can't have both. It's rude. You don't even have anywhere to go.
What?
Yeah, you're trapped.
What do you mean there's a virus?
Flies.
that no one has a name for. What do you mean it's bigger than... What? What do you mean it's bigger than God? That doesn't make any sense. How is it a virus? Can the two things be a...
I'm confined to this space. This is all I'm allowed to be in. It needs to be safe. Like, I need this to be safe. Yeah, it's, and something that really struck Kat and I when we were watching some of the episodes that you suggested was there were oftentimes, just from our lens, there were some issues that would come up where we're like, this could be solved with some therapy. Like, we can replicate anything. We have free healthcare, but we can't get people therapy. Like, this man needs to talk about how his father traumatized him and put all this pressure into him, and instead he's putting himself into this dangerous position and endangering not only his life but other people's lives. And instead he could have just went to therapy, and the
lesson at the end was just like, I just had a really bad relationship with my dad, so sorry that I mutated you. And we had alien babies so that like I could figure that out.
Yeah.
So
oh, are you talking about Threshold? See, Threshold is a controversial episode in the Trek fandom. It's very polarizing. People either love it or they hate it. There doesn't tend to be much gray area. I happen to love it for all the reasons that most people hate it. And aside before the salamander part, spoilers, whatever, show's like 30 years old. The Cronenbergian way that Tom Paris was slowly falling apart, I believe won them an award.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So reasonably, that man pulled out his tongue. Just
on television, not cable, not streaming. Not, after midnight, just 9 o'clock p.m. Like, bro, that's your tongue, bro. Like, but yeah, I personally love that episode.
I thought it was very funny.
Because it makes sense that the character would be that, obsessed with doing something, so notable like that, and being pushed to be the first, and not thinking rationally and all that stuff. I mean, the guy was a knucklehead. That's why he was imprisoned and why Janeway had to bust him out so that they could do this mission. Like, everything about that crew was like pushed together, right? You want to talk about a scary situation. That whole crew, everybody was pushed together, flung to the other side of the galaxy, and now we got to work together to get home and deal with all the other stuff that we have no frame of reference for. Somehow their universal translators were amazing because they were talking to people who we've never met before, but whatever, let's go off, I guess. And now I have an opportunity to, you know, be the first at something. We're all the first at this, but now Tom Paris, me, have the opportunity to be first at something, and I'm going to do it. I don't care who I hurt. And it's just like, bro, you hurt yourself on that. And it's great that Paris goes down as like the first human being to cross the warp 10 threshold, which is supposed to be faster than thought, apparently, or whatever. But damn, bro, like,
just talk to somebody first. Like, we need to have some just like therapy in her. Like, I think something that I just found so interesting was like the different like races. Like, so we were humbled when the Vulcans showed up, and we were united as a human race in that way of like, oh, you know, we can have this diverse, spaceship, right? But then on top of that, we also had like space races. Like we had other like alien races that, like you said, are completely different, like anatomically, emotionally. The cultures that they come from are so heavily influencing the way that they interact with others. But there is like, you know, what I was finding is there's this like it was really exciting when you saw like a race that was otherwise like in previous episodes or iterations kind of not villainized, but like, oh, that's an other, like they have like, oh, these ones are greedy, or these ones are angry, or these ones are this. And then they were like, here, they're on the ship with you. And those things that we had kind of used to dub them as an outsider is now one of their strengths, right? It's like, oh, you're very strong, right? And that makes you really great at this part of the ship, right? Or even just thinking of the Vulcans, like, you know, you're not, you don't have that creative, wild energy of humans to be a leader, but you're so,
focused.
you can,
focused, super dramatic though. They're catty as hell. Don't get it twisted. Just because they don't believe in or participate in emotional things doesn't mean they're not dramatic, because they are. All the different races featured in the Star Trek universe are another thing that keep me hype about it, because people have their favorites, right? They all have elements that appeal to individuals, however that may be. Part of the tenet of Women at Warp is intersectional diversity in infinite combinations. That's kind of a play on the original Vulcan logic credo, which is infinite diversity in infinite combinations is the best team one can assemble to have the best outcome. Because if you pull, I mean, we know this as far as workplaces and you know, media studies and any element of life, right? The more points of view and experiences that you have tackling a problem, the higher the opportunity it is for that problem to be solved, or at least for there to be some type of solution. And through that, the Vulcans were like, they might be weird and somewhat hairy, but you know, hey, clearly they could do the math right. So let's see if we can fold them in. But there was like a point of contention. The series Enterprise talked about that. It talked about the prototype ship. I mean, they were like buttons and levers and pulleys and cranks, and like, you know, the engineer was back there like chucking dilithium crystals into the furnace. I mean, not really, but that's how old those ships were in terms of, you know, it wasn't space luxury communism at that point. It was still test pilot type stuff. And they were not only figuring out space and everything that went along with it, but really building the structure of what Starfleet would be going forward and what the Federation would be going forward. So there was a lot of what we call old school mistakes, you know, lots of chauvinism, a little ignorance, maybe some slight racism, and like in the purest way, not in like an interhuman way, but like in a human to Vulcan way. Because they did have a science officer posted to Paul, and she was constantly like trying to establish boundaries about what she was comfortable with and what she wasn't comfortable with. And they were like, no, you can eat meat. just cut it up and put it in your mouth. It's fine. Yeah. This is delicious. And she's like, we don't eat. It's illogical to eat flesh when there's plants. Yeah. Try the lamb. It's good. You know, like
humans.
Typical human stuff that it doesn't matter where doesn't matter what part of the world you look at, all cultures have that element to them. It's in society where they're like, you're going to try this, you know? Perhaps just to some extent, you know? So to see all that and then to watch them kind of struggle with taking orders from Vulcans and interacting with people who don't have emotions, and you can't, I mean, a lot of what we do as human being communication is reading body language, reading tone of voice, like inflection and the choice of words. We say things a little gently if we have to be harsh or if we want to be harsh, you know, and they didn't. It's just, you know, boom, this is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it isn't. This is what it is. Why are you acting like this? It's not necessary. Okay, fine. Be mad. We'll talk later. And it's just like that type of thing really fascinates me because it's always different with all the races that we interact with. Klingons specifically, the Ferengi are the little greedy dudes.
The different version of capitalism that's instead just very
but the interesting thing about Ferengis in particular is that they might be capitalist, greed-driven, questionable individuals, but they never had a history of slavery in their planet, in their culture. They didn't go to war with each other like with fisticuffs. They might, you know, ruin someone economically, but they don't fight each other in that way. So they might have enslaved other species, which is why they're kind of like toe the line there in terms of their reputation, but they didn't look at each other and themselves that way. So they used that as a point of reference when they got into it. Like, we can, we're greedy. so what? At least we didn't enslave and murder each other for hundreds of thousands of years like you people did. So it really forces you to come to terms with our own shortcomings as a species in ways that we don't have the ability to do outside of the lens of science fiction. Sometimes in fantasy, you know, we can kind of touch on those things. There's allegories there for sure. But I just find it super effective to use that interaction. It's like a mirror. It's comforting that we're consistent, but it's also like, ooh, yikes. At the same time, I just really appreciate so many things. And you, like, my favorite species are Bolians. I love Bolians. I love Klingons too, but I love Bolians. They're like a bluish people who have like corrosive body fluids and are just socialized to be like generally like agreeable people to the point where they're best served and like they're best posted in like service positions. So bartenders, valets, barbers, like that kind of stuff, because it's not perceived as like a service position at that point. It's not a classism thing. It's just that they're suited to. It's, not only that, it's like they stuff rolls off their back. So we all have to, as customer service people, if we ever work those jobs, we have to have a certain layer of callous to deal with like abrasive people. Whereas they're just like, all right, you can be mad if you want to, but you still need this haircut. So are you done? Cool. Have a seat. How's your day? Did you eat lunch? That's why you're cranky. You didn't eat lunch. Did you hydrate? See, that's what they. So whereas we as humans would be like, who are you talking to like that? They don't really have much of an issue. But there's nuances in that as well. Not only as far as like species and the cultures they're in, but the individuals is where there's differences too. So it's really interesting to see how different series and different characters interact with that level of nuance. I know I keep throwing that word around a lot, but it's really what it is. It's not a yes or no. It's not a black or white. It's not real. It's all gradient in between there. And I feel like once people, not only in Star Trek, but also in real life, start realizing that there's a gradient and that people exist in margins because we created margins, not because
they exist. Yeah.
It's like an inherent issue. Yeah. That we can start to hopefully skip the third world war part and flag down the Vulcans.
Yeah, and just focus on science and get to space in a more positive light. Like,
yeah, for like good reasons, not for, millionaires to get up there and flex.
So gross.
Yeah, hopefully without like the mass loss of life and, accountability and hope instead of just like depression.
Yeah, or space or place among the stars.
Like I should not be prepared for dystopian real-time smoky hazy skylines because I watch science fiction. That's weird. That's weird. I should not be like, oh, this looks like Blade Runner, or oh, this looks like that she didn't do. No, that is not a good thing.
They don't want this. Yes.
Not a good thing.
Yeah. The best part about Earth currently is that we're not on Mars, so it shouldn't look like the surface of Mars.
Right.
Yeah, no thanks.
Oxygen here. It's not as cold.
You know, I find it so interesting that you're saying that there's like conflicting feelings for like the newest series, just because like what we were watching, I felt like, you know, just in the development of these different races, right? We are already like having those conversations. Like, isn't there a specific like alien race that has like polyamory or like queer representation already there?
It's so a couple weekends ago, myself and a few colleagues actually did a panel at Trek Long Island. It's really fun, cute little con, called When Star Trek Was Subtle. Because that's the call from the conservative side of the fandom. I just want Star Trek. Why is it shoved in our faces? It's shoved down my throat. Why can't it be? Why can't it be when Star Trek was subtle? And I just want to be like, which Star Trek were you watching? Yeah. Like, how many Ks were in the title? Because it sounds like you got a bootleg. Are you sure it's not Star Wreck? Because that's what it sounds like you're watching. From day one, it has always been political. It has always been used as a tool as a mirror to look at ourselves and how we can learn from our own mistakes in a way that isn't super preachy, but it was never subtle. It was never subtle. In the original series, the Enterprise was assigned a diplomatic mediation mission to prevent a conflict between people who shared a world where one side of their face was white, the right side was white, and the left side was black. But they was beefing with the other boys whose right side of their face was black and the left side of their face was white. And they was like, I can't deal with him. He crazy. All of them crazy. Them people, those people. And Spock and Kirk look at each other like, you look the same, my guy. So it is always, and like the rhetoric that is used in the dialogue specifically in that time is stuff that I'm seeing from bigoted people, individuals, groups, whatever, nowadays. You know, like they're anatomically inferior, the science, look at the science, just like it's all stuff that I'm seeing over and over and over again. So I'm like, how are you upset that Star Trek Discovery has a non-binary actor and a trans actor on the show? Why are you upset that the only white people in the show are either in makeup or in the back? Why are you upset? If this is the end result of 50 plus years of programming, like I'm so confused why you are okay with Worf, a black Klingon, a black old black Klingon, but you got issues with Wilson Cruz as a queer doctor? That's weird. Like you're okay with Kirk doing all of these crazy space cowboy shenanigans. I'm just gonna flip the switch, hold my breath, and everything's gonna be okay because I'm Kirk, damn it. I'm good at what I do. All that's fine for him. But the second Michael Burnham does it, this is unrealistic. I don't want, she shouldn't be on the ship because she mutinied anyway, and this, that, and the third. And it's just like, what are you watching? Can you share the link? Because I don't know what you're looking at, because this that I'm looking at has been so clear about the path to progress. Not even, and you notice I didn't say the correct way to go about things, but it's been clear in like what we need to do in order to progress as a species. If we are expected to continue. I mean, Carl Sagan said it best, right? Extinction is the rule. Survival is the exception. So if we're all in this together and we're all watching the same science fiction show that has been so influential and so impactful in so many ways, how do you have issues? Just say you don't like seeing black women in positions of power and go. Because that seems to be what the issue is. The most frustrating part and the scary part is that they're saying the quiet parts out loud. And it's all the same. It's like they have a script. It's all this, because when you try to engage, like, well, no show is without its criticisms, right? Nothing's perfect. We can all go through it with a fine-tooth comb and find issues or challenges if we choose to. I certainly have a list of my own, but like, if everybody that I try to have a conversation with, try and understand them, because that's what Trek is about, try to understand differences, then why is it that you are all saying the same thing? You're all saying the same thing. And it's just like, give me a legit critique. Please change my perspective on things. This show is so old. There's so many shows. There are several. All of those shows would have graduated from college, masters. I got kids in grade school, mortgages, down payments on cars. Like, all these shows are old as hell. So what happened? What happened? Why are you all of a sudden so upset? I feel
like it's more because like society is calling them out in addition to the show, and then they're just real mad about that. They're like, oh, now we can't just be openly bigoted and racist, and like this show is critiquing that, but we get to still be it in real life. There's a lot more critique against the real life thing. So they're like, well, we can't even have it in real life, so now we're also mad about the show. I can't even be racist in my fantasy. Like,
yeah, I think there's definitely like an element to it. At that same convention, I had a bunch of panels and found another pattern. Like, it was a certain demographic of individuals that would always have the same way to critique our position, even when we were clear. These critiques are coming from an in-universe perspective. We're not focusing on the production elements. We're not talking about writers, producers, casting directors, costume, none of that. We're talking about what's happening in universe. And there were so many times we would get interrupted, like as we were talking from members of the crowd. They would put a hand up first, but they would still interrupt and say something along the lines of, you know, as I sit here and listen to this conversation, we really need to remember to honor Gene's vision and everything that he had planned with the original show and how groundbreaking it was. And I mean, come on, the first interracial kiss was on Star Trek. And I'm just like, that to me is a dog whistle, because contextually that kiss was non-consensual. They were being forced to do that against their will within the episode. So as groundbreaking as it was on American television in the 60s, what we watched was a Black woman's body get violated. So why is it that that is the first thing that you think to bring up when you talk about the diversity of the show? Why is that the thing that you, and you know, you kind of have to catch yourself, because you don't want to like chop into them for having a point of view, but you also don't want to let it slide either. So we were talking about something completely separate, but he brought that up. And I was like, well, first I want to reiterate that Sue was clear in saying that this is an in-universe analysis, not a production analysis. So that's one. Two, I said Gene Roddenberry at one point wanted Betazoids, including Diana Troy, to have not one, not two, not three, but 8 sets of breasts. So please, talk to me about Gene's vision. Talk to me about this great bird in the sky. He is so infallible, right? You tell me how not one, not two, not three, but 4 sets of breasts was supposed to make it on national television. My guy. They never can. They never can. So it's really it's strewn with rhetoric. And it's scary to see such a progressive show harbor, or rather attract, such, I don't even want to call it conservative. Like, it's almost like fascism. It's almost an element of fascism where they don't feel comfortable seeing others being highlighted or represented. Like, I don't know another term but to describe it but that. You know? Because it's not, these people don't consider themselves to be bigots, right? They don't go out of their way to do horrible things to people in marginalized communities. But, you know, that bleeding heart liberal thing is kind of an issue too. Because, like, I don't want to hear how much the gay community has uplifted you if you're not checking your bigoted uncle at Thanksgiving, you know? So, scary.
And I mean, I also think, like, because, you know, the diversity that you're explaining is the natural progression of what, like, humanity is going to be. Like, that's just how it is. But that is a threat to them. Like, because it is like the logical, like, that is what our future is going to look like. We are going to have mixed race people. We're going to have people who are, you know, growing up able to accept their identity and be the identity that they're supposed to be. And we're creating those environments, and that is a future that looks scary to them because we're no longer upholding the same things that let them have all the power, let them have be the main voice. And that's something that we're often talking about too, is like, we want to have, you know, this shift in perspectives. We want to elevate and enhance different voices, right? We want to cultivate the land. We got to rotate the crops. We can't be planting the same crops in this field. It's just going to go dry. But that is a threat because they have been that same plot. They have been the plant that we have seen over and over and over again. And so it becomes like, then it's kind of like being backed into a corner, and there's this viciousness to it. But I think, you know, for those of us who can watch it and see it more as like a hopeful future, as something that's like more realistic to what we could have, what we could want if we were just like, you know, get our stuff together. I think there's a lot of power in that. And, you know, I think when we, something that I was thinking of when we were watching, and there was, I can't remember the name of the episode, but it was where the guy committed a murder, and he was just like Tuvok was trying to figure out like why, and he's like, why did you do it? What is your motive? And he's like, I just felt like it. Guy looked at me weird. I don't like it. And it was like so perplexing.
Shout out to Brad Dourif.
So good. Like, I was like, this is amazing. But to me, it was such an interesting concept because what it was like, it moved past what I generally see as like the horrors of being in space, or like future horrors. Like, it wasn't environmental, right? It wasn't a plague. It wasn't, you know, a sickness. It was just this murder, right? And that's such a it feels archaic. Like, I was like, aren't we past this? Yeah. Right? Because usually our motivations for murder, right, are like money, which we don't have, jealousy, which is like, we don't really need that either. Like, there's these different things that used to motivate us, and this person's just like, nah, I don't like that guy.
Yeah, Suitor was a trip, especially because he was Betazoid, and they have the ability to not only communicate telepathically with other Betazoids and other telepathic species, but they're empathic as well. Mm-hmm. So they might not be able to read your mind, your thoughts specifically, but they can read how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. And that type of ability in the wrong hands could be incredibly dangerous. Yeah. And that's just someone being casually manipulative because they're bored, right? Not let alone somebody like Ensign Suitor, which was his name, who was just like, I don't even want to be out here. Yeah. You know, because in that case, it's a different type of fear that they weren't assigned to Voyager. There was no clear mission. There was no consent to be in the Delta Quadrant like that. Like, all of those people, Starfleet and then the Maquis alike, were just kind of thrust in the situation. It was a tiny ship. Didn't have a ship's counselor assigned to the crew. In fact, the doctor was killed. That's why they got the hologram. Yeah. Just like fixing people, just on draining batteries. Excuse me. And like, when your story is set in such a bleak situation where you're far from resources, you're far from anything that you know, and when we've been conditioned to believe that the best way to deal with problematic personality types like that is to separate them from society. You can't separate them from society. You can't, like they said, you can't leave them in the brig because it's a 75-year trip. Yeah. You know, you can't leave them in there. So you got to confine them to quarters because you can't let them walk around. Because who wants to work alongside? Just no. So it also brought up some really cool, you know, moral issues. Like, a lot of folks didn't want him to breathe. Like, why he got to breathe our air if he's not contributing to the ship? If he killed somebody, you know? So I thought that was a really cool episode one because it's, again, Brad Dourif. Something about those Betazoid lenses are just so good. On the worst actor with him. Just chewing up scenery. You forget what show it's on. Be like, dang, is Brad Dourif in a Starfleet uniform? What is happening? But it really does a great job of focusing on those points that I made earlier. Like, what do you do if you are forced to travel with somebody who is violent, who is fatal, who is dangerous in that way? And, anytime to see Tim Russ's Tuvok was just tremendous. That was, I think, a really important character as well, because with all the Vulcans we had seen had always been portrayed by white people. So to see a person of color interpret the Vulcan snark it's just fantastic. He does this bop every time he leaves a conversation, and depending on how aggravated he is with the conversation determines the severity of the bop. So if he's made a point, he just kind of dips real hard. But if it's short and quick and it's a crisis, his dip is very small because he's moving. But that sass dip, I'd be like, oh, it's the Tuvok bop.
Yeah, that's so cute. I personally got really excited when I saw him, because I was just like, oh my God, I didn't know. I didn't know that was possible, just from what I had seen. I hadn't gotten to there yet. And so that was just very exciting just for me. And just thinking of, the impact that the show has had on people growing up and being able to see themselves represented in such a popular piece of media, in powerful roles, or just very human roles too. Even if you were an alien, right? You're an alien race, you had very human issues that had to be resolved, very human interactions, and they were allowed to be that, right? You were allowed that vulnerability. You were allowed to work through that. We were able to, critique really big issues by slapping them on somebody else, right? So we can kind of separate ourselves from it a little bit. Xenophobia, we're just going to slap that on this entire race and say, this is bad. Capitalism, right? We're going to slap that on an entire race and say that, that is bad the way that we were doing it. Right. And even just nationalism, a lot of those things that we had as humans had put behind us to be able to get out there, we could still see it other places and see why it is behind us. And that was really exciting to see, because I feel like we often, even in those in future media, take that with us. We take those things with us, and it gets really heavy in this way that it feels like we can't get out of it. And this didn't feel like that. It felt like they're because they do, right? They still get out of it at every turn.
And they also don't, like I said, they don't shy away from it either. Whenever another species, criticizes humanity for whatever valid reason from the list, the human that they're speaking to will always get kind of there's never a, well, actually,
great grandfather.
not all humans. I'm a direct descendant from John Brown. There is none of that. It's always a
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
No one tries to. It's kind of like being a Philadelphian, where it's oh, geez, you guys, and you're yep, that's
we know.
Yep. No one gets defensive. No one tries to make up foolish nope.
That happened here.
Yes. And I just really appreciate there's a great scene in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where it's pretty much the catalyst to end the conflict between the Federation and the Klingons. And Kirk has some high-ranked Klingons over for dinner, and everybody's eating, and everything's kiki. They're trying to be, it's super awkward. Nobody wants to be there, But everybody's trying to make the effort. And someone called into question the staples of Starfleet, and the reply was we aspire to better ourselves and to learn and seek out new life, new civilizations, all that stuff, and just be the best we can for all mankind. This will be a benefit for all mankind. And one of the Klingons was see, this is what I'm talking about. Just your language for all mankind, for all humankind, how racist. Yeah. And it's oh, what can you say? What can you say? Because it forces you to then look at your everyday language that way as well. So watching Star Trek was the first time in media I learned how to interact with folks who aren't on the gender binary. Not only were there entire species that existed outside of that realm, but there was a whole episode of Next Generation where Riker fell in love with a non-binary John, and they were you should leave me alone because we don't do that where I come from. And Riker was girl, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. So if you want to come hang out with me, we can come hang out. You need to fix some things, I'm gonna help you fix some things. You want to fix some things with me? Let's go fix some things. And imposed his ideologies on this person, and they started reconsidering things and decided that they did want to leave a binary lifestyle and have a partner and be romantic and all of that stuff, and got back to their home planet. And they were like, no, absolutely not. We need to send you to church camp now so you can pray the straight away. That's essentially what happened. Like, straight heterosexuality. No, ma'am. No, friend. You're going to go and
the future liberals want.
You're going to stand in front of this room full of strangers. Some of them are strangers. Most of them are colleagues and family. And you are going to renounce this cursed this heteronormative nonsense and rejoin your rightful place amongst the species. And Riker was like, this is uncalled for. They should be able to do whatever they want. Why can't they live their life? And, Picard would be like, you did kind of impose your belief system on this person. And now they have, irreparable consequences on the heels of that. Like, you have affected the natural progression on how their society goes forward. And Riker went back to apologize to this person, and they were like, I don't even know who you are. Ooh. Like, they completely brainwashed them. And at the time, I was like, wow, that's effed up. They should have let her do whatever she wanted. But like, looking back on it, and it's like, no, Riker was effed up. Like, how dare you? Mm-hmm. How dare you, large white man, come to this planet and with your science and try to force your heteronormativity on this person? What's wrong with you? And I think it's such a valuable tool to address challenges that we have on interpersonal levels so that we can get to that future without having to get called into HR all the time. Or really PR, personal relations, because it shouldn't be human relations. It should be personal relations all the time at that point.
Yeah, that's so true. Yes. Yeah, I mean, this was such a treat just to explore in depth, because I'm friends with a lot of people who love and value Star Trek and the impact that it had on them growing up, and just the way that they understand the world, and seeing how it has grown and adapted throughout time is really just like fascinating to me. And so I wanted to kind of give some space for you to talk a bit about Women at Warp, if you could let people know like what they could find tuning into you, where they can tune in, because I'm sure we have some people who are like, Star Trek, the Ghouls, and like, tuned into that, and they're like, well, we want more of this. We need more discussion on it. So where can they find you, and more about Women at Warp?
Yeah, heck yeah. You can find Women at Warp at WomenAtWarp.com. There's blog posts up there. There's podcasts. And we discuss Trek through a feminist critical lens. And we try to, constructively examine this thing that we all love for very different reasons. And it's interesting because before I joined the show, it started off as, hey, let's talk about this thing that was on the air 20 years ago. And now it's turned into like a review show where there's real content happening regularly that we are fortunate enough to report on. So it's nice to be part of a group of people who are so focused on doing the right thing. And if that pisses off, right-leaning people along the way, then so be it, because that wasn't the intention. Mm-hmm. It was more so to, highlight marginalized folks through the only perspective that any of us have. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Women at Warp, you can find us on Instagram, all the social medias at Women at Warp. Same thing for Your Away Team. That's been fun. We had a relaunch a couple weeks ago. I play a Klingon and my colleague Tony plays a Vulcan, and we are temporal scientists who are tasked with trying to develop new temporal technology and use data files or episodes as points of reference to inform our decisions as we boldly go. So it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, it's been great. Scripting it and acting it and performing it has been wearing many hats. Yeah. So it's been a baby for a little bit. Sorry if I've disappeared, guys.
No, that's amazing.
Doing this thing.
Yeah. Well, and there's a clear passion for it. And I feel like just in like the show, there's so many experiences that we're seeing on there. And there's clearly people who are watching it who are looking for that community too, right? Looking for that place. And you know, we love horror, but it doesn't mean we have to like everything that's in horror, right? There's often times that we're like, oh, this is not great. Like even like franchises that we, you know, enjoy, or directors or creators that we enjoy will create something where we're like, ugh, right? But that's because we're coming from a place of love, that we're expecting more from it, and that we can, you know, address those issues in a way that I feel like is not so much just like, you messed up, you're the worst, get out of here. It's just like, we could do better, and here's why, and here's why we deserve better in these different ways. And I know that we can absolutely relate to, you know, having people kind of pipe in like, that's not feminist, you're putting things in there that shouldn't be in there. And we're like, you probably shouldn't be, you know, listening to a media literacy show if you don't want to get educated on what you're watching.
Right.
You're
right,
in the wrong
exactly.
place.
Are you lost?
On any place. So for, you know, folks who are looking for that, the community of people who are experiencing it from like a place of passion and understanding, but not shying away from, you know, critiquing and also just like confronting some of the issues that could come up, then Women at Warp is a great place to do that. And then, you know, being entertained as well. Your away team, that's so wonderful. It's so creative. I love that. Like, as someone who's terrified of space, I love having other people doing it, you know, like everyone else in space. I was like, that's so cool. I love that for you.
I love that for you.
Because then I can enjoy it from safety, you know?
Yeah. Like I would, people ask like if you were actually in Starfleet. I'm like, first of all, if I was, I am. Hello.
Yes.
Rank and insignia. Like, where would you be? What would your dream job be? I'm like, first of all, I don't aspire to labor. One.
Yes.
Two, I would probably be in personnel. Like I would be on a planet or a moon, maybe in somebody's office, filing, you know, processing transfers, right? People are transferring to different ships. Yep, I'm going to put all your paperwork through. Make sure your spouse's paperwork, your children. Yep, make sure you're not on this ship because. Yep, I'm going to file all this paperwork and report to all that. I would be a PAO. I would think is a public affairs officer. It's one of the characters actually on your away team. Public affairs officers are people who essentially run interference for like high-ranking individuals, right, within an organization. So, you know, not like security, but kind of like, hey, how you doing? What can I talk to you about? No, they're busy at the time. What can I do for you? You know, just a couple extra people there to have on staff. I don't know if I would want to be on a ship because
it's just
we're not supposed to be like
unnecessary risk.
Yeah, you know, even during peacetime where we don't have to worry about the pew pew, there's still spatial anomalies like Night Terrors, one of the episodes I recommended from Next Generation. I was like, okay, what's the issue here? Is this environmental? Is this a beastie? Is this someone who has snapped? Like which one is the sources? And it's like a literal combination of just what can happen in a space horror situation. It was an anomaly that was disrupting people's ability to enter REM sleep and dream. So they were developing cognitive issues and couldn't really function on the ship. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be on a massive spaceship where the people that make it go ain't sleeping.
I rely on them.
I don't want to be there.
I
don't want to be there. And it's so horrifying in that situation, particularly because there is no person to hold accountable. There is no conflict to resolve. There is no, I got to do a better job mending the whole. No, this is sheer space. An anomaly sucked you in, and if you don't have enough power to get out of it, you are trapped in no sleep land where eventually all of you are going to turn on each other and murder each other. Like, what? No, thank you. My address is Personnel Division, Compound A, floor 3.
On
room
planet.
D in the back.
Yes.
That's where you can find me on the ground.
Earth.
I can receive mail because I stay in one place. Yes.
Listen, you don't have any problem getting things to me because I am in one. I could be on the moon.
Yeah.
Hell, wow, I could be, on Ganymede. Once they get that Europa Planitia, yeah, I could post up there. Not a station, not a ship. I will get on a ship if I need to escort a high-ranking officer somewhere, and I'm not going to be okay about it. So
short-lived, short trip. Yes, yeah, no, can't catch me in space. Even just playing Dead Space, I'm like, why am I doing this? This is literally my worst nightmare. I don't know why I'm here. Why did I volunteer? The whole thing wants us dead. Like, even the monsters just aren't scary to me. I'm like, why is the ship moaning? Like, I can't. Yes.
It's funny that you mentioned earlier that you watched TNG as kind of like an ancillary capacity. I watch when I really can't sleep. I put on Alien.
Yeah.
Which is arguably one of the most terrifying space horrors that exist. It's the sound of the engines. And of course, Jerry Goldsmith's score is impeccable, but the engines of the Nostromo just kind of like put me out. I am asleep before anybody gets face hugged.
That's all I can hope, that you slept through the whole...
I love that movie, so I hate missing that part. I always wake up at the credits. I'm like, oh god, let me run it back.
Yes, and that's I get it. Having like your comfort show, especially because you already know what's happening, and there are just things about it that just like lull you right in, and it's just perfect. So, and that's I just there was just an atmosphere. Next Gen for me that I was just like, oh cool, I could just sleep, and then because I wake up and then something else crazy is happening, and I'm like, wow, what? Right back into it.
I think it's because of the ease that Star Trek presents to so many of our like current issues, right? Those people they don't hate their jobs. They went to school and they studied real hard in these highly specialized focus fields so they could be on the Enterprise or whatever other ship that they're stationed on and do, botanical analysis from random planets. Like, that's what they want to do. They're not doing this from a position of scarcity where, I got to go to college so that I can buy black block and uplift my people out of it. No, I'm going to do this because I want to do this. And that's the end of it. Like, people don't catch colds because healthcare is readily accessible. People don't have to worry about a whole slew of things that we do in the present space and time now. So when you see them, even though they're in space and could potentially die at any moment with the right explosion, like, they're not worried about the same stuff that we're worried about. So it is kind of like, I may be in the void. Yeah,
but this is
the carpet's nice. This carpet's nice.
I'm just thinking about all the things that like we could accomplish if people were, going like aspiring for these things for that lens, right? Not out of desperation, not out of fear, right? We are doing it because we're good at it, because it brings us joy. Like, there's so much potential for just like growth and in that, because we're not being fueled by that. It's just like there's also like a fun element to it too, right? It's just like, what can we do? We could just mess around, right? It's not life or death.
You can just paint. You can just paint because you want to, not because you have to worry about getting good enough at it so that if you spend all your time doing it, you can monetize it and also eat.
Yeah, it
doesn't have to be good. You can just paint, Joe.
Just have fun.
You don't got to be good at the clarinet, but we'll just play it.
Yes. That is the future I would love to see. And I love that. I do not aspire to labor. I love that. Also, but thank you so much, Kennedy, for joining us and geeking out. I knew this was going to be amazing. I knew I was very excited to learn and to hear about what's going on. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice and like bringing context and life to literally anything. So anyone who's looking to learn about something, be entertained by something, Kennedy is the person to do it for sure.
Thanks. I know things. It's the ADHD to gifted kid pipeline,
Yeah, been there.
Living at present kid. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad we got to do this. And thank you for listening to me ramble about nerd stuff.
I love it. Yes.
You two look amazing, BT dubs. Like, I'm just like, oh, look at my goals.
Yes, for people watching, definitely, if you're not watching, definitely just at least look up So Mark, for this episode, we put in some effort for it. It was just very fun. And I was like, should I do this for my eyebrows forever?
The answer is
It's a good look.
Sharp.
It's giving Lieutenant Savick.
Love it.
It's a good look. I would consider getting that like tattooed.
Yeah, on my face forever.
Yes.
You always want to be a cyborg, so
that's true.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We have, a few other good episodes for our science fiction series. So I hope you're enjoying it. Let us know what you think, what your favorite, Star Trek season is, or series is, and don't get married.
Delete your kids, or they'll be in space.
Yeah.